Hey, comrades. So now we're going to go through a bunch of collab. What is it called? Guest starring comics. So the X-Men and the X-Men villains and all the kind of relevant X people between the issue 66, the end of the Uncanny X-Men, essentially, and before Giant Size #1, where the new X-Men, the second Genesis, essentially, the new X-Men come into play, like Wolverine and Storm and Nightcrawler and all those guys. The X-Men were involved in a bunch of stuff. Beast has his own thing and he ends up joining the Avengers, but that'll be a separate video. We'll deal with the Beast stuff and then Beast post transformation into the Blue Fuzzy version, which most people are familiar with. So now we'll talk about stuff that happens amidst that and before that and whatnot. And then anything that takes place with Beast after his transformation will be included in the Beast section. So we start off with Fantastic Four, World's Greatest Comic Magazine, number 3 out of 12. And also 4 out of 12. So pretty much Fantastic Four, they go to the X-Men because Reed wants to get Sentinels to protect the Baxter building while they're out doing adventures. Because apparently when Cyclops got them all to fly into the sun, they were able to get 2 of them not to do that. But when Reed Richards goes to look at him, Beast is like, hey, something's weird. We had like a break-in and it didn't seem like they stole anything, but then this is not the way it was before. And so him and Reed are like, should we push the button on here? And they're like, yeah, let's do it. Meanwhile, Thing and Johnny, what's his name? Johnny Storm is Fire Lad? The Human Torch. He's the Human Torch. The Human Torch, Iceman, Cyclops, and... Oh, not Cyclops. Anyway, a bunch of them are fighting in the Danger Room. And the Sentinels burst through, and so they fight them, and then the Sentinels fly off, and so everyone except for, like, Sue Storm and Crystal's an Inhuman who's dating Johnny at this juncture. And then later on she dates Quicksilver, sort of. She's out and about. She's probably the most getting out there Inhuman out of all of them that I can recall. She's in quite a lot of other stuff. She has control over elements. I assume most people understand like the basics of the Fantastic Four. But so they chase him down, and then like Spider-Man, the Daredevil, and Doctor Strange get involved for some reason. So like you have most of the X-Men, most of the Fantastic Four, and then all these guys, and then all of a sudden Doctor Strange's like, hold up, and he casts this shield over everybody, and then the Sentinels explode. And they're like, and he's like, lucky you, I protected you with the shield of the Seraphim, and the thing's like, the shield of the what the fuck? Then we go back to Jean and Professor X, who are just hanging out at the manor, and they're like, I wonder why Reed wanted us to stay here. And then Colosso comes out, and Professor X and Jean destroy Colosso. Now, you may say, Colosso? That name doesn't sound familiar, and I would agree. Because I feel like I've never heard that before. And it's introduced in this issue and then destroyed. And apparently Colosso is the name of the robot that runs the Danger Room for Professor X. All right, sure, why not? See if it ever comes up again. But there you go. And then Fantastic Four World's Greatest Comic Magazine number 4, literally just, it takes place like immediately after number 3, and it's just like Professor X and Angel saying goodbye to the Fantastic Four, and then Angel's like, you look kind of stressed out, Professor X, or whatever. Professor X is like, yeah, I think they're going to be in a lot of trouble, but I don't know why, and that's the whole issue occurs, but it's nothing to do with the X-Men, so moving on. So then we have Fantastic Four 102, 103, and 104. So in 102 we start off, and Namor, who we don't talk about too much, he joins the X-Men like in the Dark Reign. But other than that, he's a mutant, but he has like very minimal like interaction with the X-Men for the most part. Like he pops in and out, but he's not any more than any other villain or hero. And he's kind of like a villain. He's like an interesting villain. He has like his own stuff, so he's not like a crazy evil villain or anything. He just kind of like has his own objectives and his own like he's like an alien ruler, right? Because he rules over Atlantis under the ocean. Anyway, he goes out and about and he finds Magneto from the Savage Land. So at the end of the Savage Land arc, Magneto was blown up or destroyed, but he wasn't. So Namor saves him, brings him back to Atlantis, and then Magneto wants Namor to help him as a fellow mutant destroy all humans and take over the Earth. And together they would be unstoppable with his like army of Atlanteans and stuff. Namor's like, I don't know about that. So Magneto, it seems like unintentionally, he kind of taunts the Fantastic Four by like there's something in Atlantis like amplifies his powers. That never comes up again, but it's like that's how it starts. And then they send there's like a warning shot to Atlantis because of that. And then Magneto's like, look, they're trying to attack us. And so then they decide they're going to, after Namor stops the missile, he's like, we need to go figure out what's going on. Let's go. And then 103 is all about the battle. The Atlanteans are taking the battle to the surface. So then Namor, when he sees the Fantastic Four, he's like, I'm going to go talk to him. I've had interactions with them before. I think Namor first showed up in like Fantastic Four, like number 4, where he like wanted to marry Sue Storm. That was like a long time ago. Anyway, I don't remember exactly. I'm not a Fantastic Four stan, if you will. But then Magneto's like, oh, he's going to talk to him. I don't like that. So then he sends a missile off, and then Namor goes to stop the missile, but the Fantastic Four think he's doing like an attack, and so they attack him, and they get into a big fight. And then while they're all fighting, Magneto like takes over his flagship and captures Sue Storm, who was like dropping her son off at Agatha Harkness's place. Because Agatha Harkness, despite what Disney Plus wants you to believe, is just like an old woman who raises the Fantastic Four's children for them while they're out having adventures in space. Anyway, so she shows up, and then Magneto captures her, and then he like takes the flagship and goes to Atlantis and captures Lady Dorma, who's like Namor's squeeze at this time. And so when the Namor and Fantastic Four like stop fighting and figure out that like, wait a second, Magneto's involved with all this, then they get like a Magneto screen, and he's like, I captured your women, you better do what I say. And that leads us to Fantastic Four number 104. So Namor and Fantastic Four decide they're gonna like play a trick. They're gonna play a trick on Magneto. So Namor goes and pretends to be subservient to Magneto, which is what Magneto always wanted. And since he's super prideful, he's like, yes, I finally got what I wanted. So they take over New York City, despite to President Nixon's chagrin, which is when this comic takes place. It reminds me of the Futurama Nixon. He just keeps showing up and being like, you better take care of this Fantastic Four. It's pretty funny. Freaking Nixon. So Magneto, he brings the women up, and then Sue Storm almost escapes, but he threatens to kill Dorma, so then she's like, no, we'll stick together. And he puts them in like these cylinders, one with water for Dorma and one with air for Sue, and he's like ruling, and then the Fantastic Four, Reed is able to create a device that counteracts Magneto's powers, nullifying him as a villain forever and ever. We all know that's not true, but like, this device literally like stops his powers from working completely. Like, it doesn't stop his powers from working. It reverses his powers back onto him, and the more he uses his powers, the more it like cripples him. So then they come, and then Crystal, again, who has elemental powers, creates lightning, and then to distract Magneto long enough for Reed to use his thing on Magneto, and the Magneto tries to hit Reed, and then it captures him in like a protective cocoon, essentially. And then everyone's like, cool, no more battle. Namor takes Dorma and leaves. Fantastic Four like, we got him. And like, what about this guy? And like, the militia will take care of it. Probably should just put a bullet in his head. Oh, man. Anyway, so moving on from the Fantastic Four. Next, we have the Marvel Team Up number 4, which is Marvel Team Up was supposed to be a circular, or what did they call them? A floppy that was just like Spider. It's supposed to be different team ups of members of the Marvel team, but it's mostly Spider-Man. So Spider-Man has been affected by Mobius's bite. Yep, Mobius, Mobin time or whatever. The X-Men, and then Mobius kidnaps a professor. People, of course, J. Jonah Jameson blames it on Spider-Man. So the X-Men go to rescue the professor because he's a friend of Professor X's, and they start fighting Spider-Man. Eventually, they figure out that Spider-Man's not the bad guy, and then Spider-Man passes out. So they take him back. Professor X is like, "Oh no, Mobius is the true bad guy, and Spider-Man only has like 6 hours to live. So we got to go capture Mobius and get the professor back." So then the X-Men go fight Mobius. He's a pretty tough guy, but they end up beating him with the use of Cyclops' super laser eye beams. Knock him out, bring him back, cure Spider-Man. Spider-Man then kisses Jean on the lips and jumps out of the window, breaking it and escaping. Like, what the fuck? And everyone's just like, ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba. Like, what the fuck? And then next, completely unrelated to that last story, we have Amazing Spider-Man number 92. Spider-Man is having, I don't know what's going on because it's Spider-Man number 2, Amazing Spider-Man number 2. So something, Gwen Stacy is mad at Spider-Man, and then she's working for some really corrupt politician who Spider-Man's trying to rescue her from that politician, but can't let her know that he's Peter Parker and that he knows what's going on. So he grabs Gwen Stacy and like kidnaps her. This is the era Gwen Stacy, before like Mary Jane Parker shows up. And he's escaping, and then she's like screaming for help, and then Iceman hears, and so Iceman starts fighting and drives off Spider-Man, rescues Gwen Stacy, takes him back to the politician. The politician, who's like a super bad guy, is like, oh, I'm going to use Iceman to get get electoral votes. Yeah, got it. Or like to win this election. And so Iceman starts working for him to stop Spider-Man and to capture him. They get into another battle. Spider-Man like pushes him off, and then Iceman tracks him down again. But in the background, we find out that this guy's super shady and that he's going to kidnap one of J. Jonah Jameson's writers. I think his name's Robertson. It's the black guy. Is it Robertson? It's something like that. Who's like a really good guy. Just every time I ever read anything with him in it, he's just like a solid dude, and he's gonna bust the balls of this politician because he's like fighting all the corrupt stuff he's doing. So the politician kidnaps him and is gonna kill him, but then Spider-Man and Iceman both show up, see what's going on, and rescue him, and then they fight all the gangsters, and then they go and they take Robinson to like get all the incriminating evidence against a politician who gets thrown in jail, and he loses his chance to be DA of New York. All right, so continuing our adventure into the guest star appearances, or like the side stories between the end of the Uncanny X-Men and then the start of the Uncanny X-Men. Again, after all the reprints, starting in like the late 70s or early 90s. So there's like a 10-year break period. Anyway, so in issue 150 of The Incredible Hulk, the Hulk is doing Hulk stuff, and then he sees Lorna being chased by a bunch of bikers through like the Mojave Desert or wherever they're supposed to fucking be. Every time the Hulk does stuff, he's like in the Southwest. And he thinks Lorna is, what's her name? Jorella? Joria, something like that. I don't know who that is. I'm not a big Hulk guy, if you will. But it's someone he's in love with, the Hulk's in love with. And so he beats up those guys, and Lorna like escapes and runs away, and eventually she finds Alex, which is the whole reason she's down here, is she's looking for Alex. And they have a conversation about how Alex essentially ran away from home and then we like reminisce. Alex and Bobby got into a fight, like a superpower fight over Lorna, the attention of Lorna Dane. And Havok / Alex thought he killed Iceman, or almost killed him, and he's like, I can't handle my powers, I gotta run away. So then he came down to the Southwest to just like be alone and like be with his thoughts. And Lorna's here to like bring him back, and like Professor X wants to train him, and he's like, well, if you're just here for business, I want none of it, and I'm fine. And she's like, you don't understand that I love you, or I think she says it in her head. And so she runs off, and then Hulk comes and sees that she's sad, and like him and Alex like yell words at each other, and then Hulk grabs Lorna and runs off, and Alex is like, I have to do it. I have to use my powers. So he puts on his like black suit and he's like, this controls my powers as much as I can. And he goes to rescue Lorna, and Hulk realizes that Lorna's not the girl he wants, and so he's about to do some crazy shit. And then Alex shows up, and then him and Hulk like fight each other, and then Havok has to synchronize or like minimize his blast to be very precise. Like he literally quotes like Cyclops does sometimes. And he shoots it right at like the forehead of the Hulk, into his brain essentially, and like uses that. And Hulk's like, "Oh, pain! I do not like pain. Pain bad." And he's like, "Well, just put the rock down really slowly, and I'll stop." And Hulk's like, "All right, fine." So he does, and then Havok's able to like control his powers enough to use his powers to like gently bring Lorna Dane down. And this whole time, I'm like, doesn't she have magnetic powers? I feel like the writers of the Hulk like did not understand this character whatsoever. Whatever. So then he's like, "You know what? I'm gonna go back with you because I love you, and also I want to gain control of my powers. And you were right, and I was wrong." And so they head out to New York. Next is Avengers 103 and 104. So 103, the tie-in with the X-Men here is really Trask, the Sentinels, and Quicksilver and Wanda Maximoff. So we're not dealing a lot with Wanda and Quicksilver because in this era of the X-Men, they are Avengers who are mutants. Just like Namor is like a villain of the Fantastic Four, he's not like a villain of the X-Men. So we had that one issue where it dealt directly with Namor, and then we had the crossover with the Fantastic Four, but that was really because Magneto is an X-Men villain. So that's why we're not dealing more with Wanda and Quicksilver, because they are really like Avengers, like for a very long time, until like Quicksilver takes over X-Factor, essentially, like much later, like into the 90s, or even the 2000s. It's like way later. But the Sentinels are here, and Trask. So this kind of takes place shortly after Wanda and Quicksilver were like captured by the Sentinels, and this is like the last battle of the Sentinels. We find out that Trask Jr. over here is like Larry Trask, I think is his name, is a mutant who can perceive the future, right? And then the X-Men Cyclops gets all the Sentinels to go kill themselves into the sun, and yada yada yada. But at some point, the Sentinels like showed up, captured Wanda, and like left. And so the Avengers are trying to figure out where she's at. And Quicksilver, being the hothead that he is, he runs off. He's like, I know who to talk to. So he goes and tracks down Trask. And this is the best scene. Like, I read this. I had to go back and read it twice. So like, what the fuck? So he goes and he bursts through the window at Trask's like home, where like the doctor is, who's like his dad's friend, or the judge. He's a judge. The judge is there, and him and Trask are like, "What the fuck?" and so the judge pulls out a gun, and the Quicksilver's like, "Put that gun away. I'm not here to harm anyone. I just need to talk to Trask. I just civilly." And like no one acknowledges that this motherfucker just like bashed through the window, like the middle of the night. They're just like, "Well, he maybe doesn't want to talk to you. Who are you? What are you doing here?" And it's like, "Why did you jump through the window? Why did you just knock on the door, you asshole?" So then the guy's like, I don't know about that. And so Quicksilver like knocks the gun out of his hand, grabs Trask, and runs off. And then when he gets to like a calm place, he's like, hey man, I just wanted to talk. I know you can like track stuff, or like what's going on with the Sentinels. So if you could just tell me where like the Sentinel base is, besides the one that we were all trapped in, then I'll let you be on your way, because I just want to rescue my sister. And Jesus. So ridiculous. And Larry's like, I don't really know. And then Quicksilver's like, it's the amulet, it's stopping your brain. And he like snatches it off. And then Larry's like, oh no, I'm remembering everything. And he remembers that there's an Australian base that they can go to, that his dad built, that is like unrelated to anything else. It's like the first gen Sentinels or whatever. And so then he gives them the amulet back and like, let's go. And they go and they like get like a private jet and like fly over there. Meanwhile, the Avengers are like doing whatever. Like, at this point in time, it's like the Avengers that most people would recognize. It's Thor, Iron Man, Captain Roger, or Hawkeye, and Steve Rogers as Captain America. I think that's it right now. And they just kind of figure it out. They like do some research, and Tony Stark does some stuff, and they're like, oh, there's a base in Australia. We should go check that out. And so then they just fly over there. And so... When they get there, they find the Sentinel, and Vision. And so when they get there, they find the Sentinels, and they start fighting them. And like I said, Quicksilver and Trask they fly over in like a jet, and they're just like chit-chatting on the plane. So that leads into issue Avengers 104. And in 104, we continue with the battle. Trask has like a vision of the future where it's like the end of the world, like the world gets destroyed and everyone dies, and like they have to save the Avengers. The Avengers are knocked out, and it's like very, very dark and ominous. Quicksilver's like, shut up, we're gonna rescue my sister, it'll be great. So they go in, and then Quicksilver fights some Sentinels, and he's like, you gotta save my sister, that's gonna solve this whole problem. Meanwhile, we finally get to Wanda, and Wanda is talking to number 2, so there was Master Mold way back with Bolivar, and then I guess his number 2, he's alive. He's a little melted in the face, so I don't know if he went up to the sun and then like had a change of heart and came back. But there's him and like 6 Sentinels. That's all that's left in this space. But he essentially tells Wanda his grand plan. So his grand plan is that he's going to use her as a female mutant, because it has to be a single female mutant for some reason, and not Jean Grey, because that's too hard. So because they don't know where Jean Grey is, or Marvel Girl, but they do know where the Avengers are, because the Avengers are very like forward facing, unlike the X-Men, who are very sneaky peeky, hiding away all the time. So they grabbed her, and then they have this device, and when they use the device and charge it with like with the Sentinel power, it's going to like create sun rays, and the sun rays are going to come down and like fry out everyone's circuitry so that they can't have kids, and then the Sentinels can kill the mutants, and then they can repopulate the Earth with like clone or test tube babies, and then everything will be great because it'll just be humans. And he's like, that's what we're going to do. And she's like, that's terrible. And then he's like, oh, there's a disturbance, I'll be back. And so he goes to like handle the Avengers. Meanwhile, Vision separates himself from the rest of the Avengers to hunt down Wanda. Meanwhile, Quicksilver's fighting guys, and then he gets injured, defeating like 1 or 2 Sentinels. And so he's like, Trask, you gotta go save my sister, do it. And he's like, yeah, I will. The Avengers run into like number 2 and the rest of the Sentinels, and they start fighting. They're about to fight them, but then number 2's like, wait, let me talk to you first. And they're like, all right, yeah. And Tony Stark's like, yeah, I mean, these guys can't hurt humans anyway, so like, what's the point? And they're like, bro, you've just been fucking fighting these guys like 5 seconds ago, you dumbass. This fucking comic. I love it. So the number 2's like, aha, and he like sneak attacks them, and they're on the ground. But while this was all going on, Vision rescued Wanda, and so Wanda comes in right before number 2 is able to like kill the Avengers, and like uses her hex power, and then Vision's like, suck it, bitches. My girlfriend has stopped you from doing your assholery. Or I don't know if they're dating at this point. I think at this point she's kind of dating Hawkeye, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've read through the Avengers comics, like a very long time, and I don't remember exactly. I don't remember this story, so I don't exactly remember when this was going down. But I think Hawkeye and her kind of had a thing, and then they do that later. But then she marries Vision, and that causes like issues because Hawkeye's like jealous, and it's a soap opera, so obviously. But I think at this point she's more with Hawkeye, or maybe there's like some stuff going on there. I don't know. I didn't get too into the weeds with it. But then Trask, well, the Sentinels are they're going to fight Vision and Wanda, and he's just going to activate his thing and do his whole thing, and they're all like, no. And then Trask like sees a button, and he's like, oh, this is the button that when you turn it, it's a giant red button. This button, why is it turned off? This button should be turned on because that's how the Sentinels it like radiates light wherever there's mutants so that Sentinels can find them more easily. So he turns the button on and dun dun dun, number 2 is a mutant. Yes, he's a mutant. He got close to the sun and the sun mutated him, so he's a human mutant Sentinel hybrid of sorts. And this is the first time we get this, because this definitely comes up later with like Nimrod and such. But for now, it's like, holy shit, he's a mutant, fuck. And so then he's like, whatever, I'm still going to use my powers. And then the other Sentinels are like, no, mutant, we will stop you. And it's exactly the same story as Trask, where it's like, I'm the leader. And they're like, we will not follow you, you're our mutant, once he loses his amulet. And so the other Sentinels murder the shit out of number 2, like dissolve him to like nothing, essentially. And Captain America's like, wow, they really dissolved that motherfucker good. And then they're like, oh, but the other Sentinels can still activate the thing. And it's like, first of all, Wanda's not attached to anything, so they cannot. And second of all, they just like collapse. And then they're collapsing, they kill Trask. And then Quicksilver or somebody like is like, oh, when he saw the end of the world, it was the end of the world for him, but it wasn't for us. And that's what drove him so crazy. That's crazy. Oh, well, fuck that guy. Let's get out of here. And then they do. The end. Now they're like, he's a hero and no one will know because something, but he was a great man at the end of the day. Dun dun dun. Next we have an interesting like mini story about Angel that takes place in Khazar 2, Khazar 3, and Marvel Tales number 30. So I'm not going to designate because they're all kind of like short side stories that lead up to like one actual like issue. But yeah, Khazar had his own thing, and there was like an Angel mini story in there for 2 issues, and then you had to get Marvel Tales to get like the 3rd story. Sneaky Marvel back in the day, trying to get you to buy a bunch of fucking comics you didn't actually want to get the whole story. So this story it only focuses on Angel. His deal is his dad's sick with something, and Angel's out just like fighting crime, and he finds these guys who end up working for this character named the Dazzler, and he stops them, beats them up, and then heads home. And then he's like, I'm just going to hang out with you tonight, Dad. You're sick, and I just want to hang out with you because I love you because you're my dad. And then he gets a call from like Candy Southern, his girlfriend, that we didn't really deal with too much in the Uncanny X-Men. She came up like once or twice, and it's just heavily implied that they're like together because at some point in this series, we see he has a picture of her that's like, love you forever, Warren, you're the best boyfriend ever, love you, Candy Southern. And so she calls and wants to go to like a sock hop or some bullshit. And he's like, no, I'm going to stay here with you, Dad. And his dad's like, I order you to go be heterosexual and have a relationship with your girlfriend. I'll be fine. And he's like, all right, Dad, you talked me into it. So he heads off to do that. And, I love Candy Southern, actually. She's a fantastic character, always. So she's great. She's like fun. She is a nice foil to Angel. The only girlfriend of Angel's I like more is Psylocke, because fucking Psylocke. So anyway. So they go have a good time, and they're dancing and all this stuff, and then he's like, well, I better get home. My dad's not feeling too well, and I just want to like hang out with him in case anything happens. And she's like, for sure, boyfriend. And so they're heading back, and they hear a news story where dun dun dun, his dad got killed. What? Fuck. And we get some like, meanwhile, Dazzler, yeah, not Dazzler that everyone would recognize as the actual Dazzler if you read any like comics or saw the cartoon, or even that one Wolverine movie I think had Dazzler in it for like a second, maybe, I can't remember. But no, not that Dazzler. This other totally different character that has nothing to do with that Dazzler whatsoever, who's also named as Dazzler. He's like upset because Warren Worthington II, Angel's dad, is gonna turn him into the police or something. And I'm like, bro, you're like a supervillain. Of course it's turn the police. The fuck. Anyway, that makes more sense later. So he kills him, And then Angel comes back and he's like distraught. Or he runs off from Candy Southern, and he tears his stuff off and turns into Angel. And then he goes and tracks down the guys who murdered his dad, and he beats the shit out of him. And he almost kills him until the FBI director Duncan, who's like the X-Men, the secret mutant like liaison, grabs him and is like, "No, son, if we want to get the guy who was actually in charge, we gotta let these guys live so we can interrogate them and do it." And he's like, "All right, I'll do your plan, but you call me later. You know who I am." And he flies off home, and he's like really sad, and he's like, "Oh, I love you, Candy Southern, but I can't be with you anymore because there's a ghost between us because of what happened to my dad. And like, if I'd never gone out with you, my dad would still be alive. And just every time I see you, it reminds me of that." And he's like being very melodramatic and like telling Nuevo about it. Meanwhile, Duncan's like interviewing these guys, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like the Dazzler goons." And the Dazzler goons are like, fuck Dazzler. That guy's an asshole. We'll totally rat him out. And then Dazzler has like some device where he can like amplify his powers, and he activates it to like spy on them, and then he uses like his Dazzler magic to like destroy them, or maybe he put like a chip in their brain or something. I wasn't exactly sure what was going on, but they die. And then Duncan's like, "Rats!" And that's the last time we see him. So Angel on his own decides he's gonna go figure out what the fuck's going on. And oh no, he doesn't. He's sitting there and he's like, "Oh, when is Duncan going to call? When's this interview going to be over?" And then all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, the pain in my body." And he gets teleported, I guess, which is another power Dazzler had, to Dazzler's like headquarters underneath like the Abraham Lincoln Monument, I think. Somewhere in DC. And so then he fights a bunch of goons as Warren Worthington, but eventually gets overwhelmed. And then the Dazzler comes. He's like, "Oh, I killed your dad because he was an asshole and he tried to turn me into the police or something. And you're next." So they put him in like a jail cell in this area while he like and then he turns into Angel, which means he just changes his costume, and then he heads out to and then he crawls through like a vent, and then he starts fighting the goons again. He's beating them all up, and he's about to attack Dazzler, and then Dazzler's like, "Ta-da!" And he has Candy Southern in like a tube, and he's like, "I have mesmerized her, so she is alive, but she is under my ensorcelment." And Warren's like, "Dun, dun, dun, what am I going to do?" And he's like, "You're going to go get a diamond for me." Or first of all, he's like, "I'm going to tear off your mask and see who you are." So they tear off the Angel's mask, and it's Warren Worthington. And then he's like, "Fuck you, man." And then the guy's like, "Aha, I got a secret for you." And so Dazzler takes off his mask, and it's dun, dun, dun. It's Warren's Uncle Bert, that asshole. And he's like, "What? Why would you kill your own brother?" And he's like, "Because I'm a criminal. And because I went to jail, and when I came out, I wanted your dad to help me take over the world." And he said no, and I was stealing diamonds and shit and doing nefarious stuff, and he was going to rat me out to the police, so he had to die. And I'm going to ensorcel you, and then you with my devices, and then you'll have to serve me, and you'll steal the diamond that I want, and then I'll use it on this device, and I'll blow up Paris, and then the whole world will be under my control. Whoa, 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 whoa. And so he uses his like mind control device on Angel, and then Angel pretends to be ensorcelled. But it doesn't work because Angel is like, an X-Men, so he's much better than like a normal human, and Uncle Bert did not expect that to be the case, so sucks to be him. Because Angel goes and he gets like the diamond. I thought he was going to steal the diamond, but he just like shows up and there's some gangster holding a gun at him, and he's like, "Here's a diamond. Tell Dazzler I want a place in his new world order." And Angel's like, "Thank you." So he flies back and he's like, "Here you go." And then he's like, "Let Candy Southern free." And Angel's like, and Uncle Bert's like, "No, put him back in the case. We'll use him later." And then we see Angel's kind of fighting with the goons while the guy puts the diamond in, and then all of a sudden you hear like explosions, and Uncle Bert or Dazzler's like, "No, what happened? The device is exploding. It's not working." And then Angel like kicks the shit out of the goons and is like, "Aha, you dumbass! I gave you glass that looked like fucking diamond. I did that all while I was just flying around a few minutes ago." And he grabs Candy Southern and then grabs his uncle and he flies out of there, and the whole base underneath like the Lincoln Memorial in like the mall of DC like explodes in a giant explosion. No one cares. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fucking okay. And then he's flying back to like clearly New York, I guess, from DC. It's probably supposed to still be DC, but I don't know. At some point it's like New York, or maybe something to the Lincoln Center in New York. I was a little confused because they kept talking about going to DC and then New York and then DC. Maybe his parents live in DC, and then this guy's under the Lincoln Center. But still, a giant explosion in like Manhattan. Anyway, and then the Dazzler like punches him in the face, and so Warren like drops Candy Southern and Dazzler, and so he goes to rescue Candy Southern because of course. And then Dazzler like plummets to his quote unquote death. I don't ever remember seeing this guy again, so I'm assuming he just dies, but he may not. And so it's a Comic Code Authority issue where you don't really know what happens unless he shows up again later. But I don't ever remember him showing up later. But maybe he does. I have not read every single like X-Men comic or Angel comic. Anywho's. So then, he takes Candy Southern back, and the end. Happy ending. He got his vengeance. Vengeance is always so sweet. It's the sweetest. All right, so we got one more little story before we need to go and hit up the Beast stuff. We're already kind of like in the Beast territory. Like there's already been kind of hints at stuff that happens in like the Little Beast miniseries, which isn't a Beast miniseries. It's like the Astonishing. I think it's an Astonishing Stories, which, if I remember correctly, is where Iron Man started off. And too, there was like a thing back way in the day, like in the 20s and 30s or 40s, probably more like, where you wouldn't you'd have like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, but you didn't have like the Iron Man. You had Tales of Suspense or Tales of Adventure or Amazing Tales or stuff like that. Like the DC, you didn't have Batman, you had Detective Comics, and then Superman, you had Action Comics, right? Like it was very generic until these characters became like very beloved, and then they started having their own series. But this last little bit before we get into the Beast stuff. And like the stuff after the Beast, kind of there's more collab kind of stuff going on after the Beast story. But we'll just include that. That'll be a separate video a couple weeks from when this one releases. So we go into Avengers 110 and 111. So this story leads directly into the stuff we're going to get to in after the Beast tale. But I feel like this is a good spot to wrap up this initial kind of like other comics with the X-Men characters in it, and then lead into the Beast stuff, because that's very transformative for like one of the main X-Men characters. And then we'll go forward. But what happens here is that there's a lot of interesting stuff. So we've covered a lot of years. So the X-Men like pop in and out of some of these stories, but it's like very short, and it's very kind of sporadic. But looking at it like this, it seems like stuff's going very quickly. But when last we saw the Fantastic Four, just earlier in like this current video, Johnny Storm was like dating Crystal, and she was a member of the Fantastic Four. This starts off with Quicksilver and Wanda, who are back with the Avengers. Everything's good there. But Quicksilver, in the meantime, from like even the last Avengers story we talked about, he got hurt and then rescued by the Humans, and then Crystal was there, and then they fell in love, and now they're together, and they end up having a kid later. And so they're like very together. And Wanda has now abandoned like Hawkeye and is like with Vision, which is a big thing for a while. And then so her and Quicksilver get into a fight over this like communication screen, because he's upset that like that she's dating a chunk of plastic or whatever. So poor Johnny, he's out with Crystal, and then poor Clint, he's out with he's out with Wanda. He's also out. Hilariously enough, he's also out with Natasha Romanoff, because he had a thing with her as well, but she's with the Daredevil at this time, and that becomes important only because they pop in. So after this little battle, Wanda kind of storms off with Vision, and because Quicksilver's like, I'm done talking, brr! And then all of a sudden Thor's like, wait a second, something's popping up on the screen. So what pops up is like the X-Mansion. It looks torn up, beat up, and they see like Professor X like passed out. And they're kind of talking about it, because some of them have met Professor X, some haven't. Because you got to remember, with the X-Men, Professor X always took like a back seat. He was always hiding or not being around. So even when the X-Men like interacted with the Avengers, like Captain America specifically a few times, or Iron Man interacted with Angel, for example, right? That there was not like a lot of Professor X there, but Thor was contacted by Professor X at some point, and so he's like, wait, I recognize that guy. That's Professor X. He's one of the X-Men, I think. Or I don't know if he even ties it to the X-Men. He's just like, I know that guy. He reached out to me for help one time. We should go help him. So they head to the X-Mansion, and again, it's all turned up, and there's lots of like sketchy stuff going on. But Wanda and Captain America find Professor X, and they wander in there, and then they get trapped, because there's like a sneaky trap. And they're eventually able to break out, and they have the Professor, and then there's some other like sneaky traps. Like there's like the roof collapses a couple times, or there's like rocks thrown at them, and they finally all get out. But Iron Man's like not around; he's kind of missing. And then they hear like this melodic tone, and it's the flute guy from the Savage Land. He's still alive, but apparently Khazar did not kill him, which was shocking, because he straight up murdered him at the end of the X-Men run, Uncanny X-Men run. But I guess not, because here he is. And instead of summoning like whatever weird sea creature, he summons a bunch of like dinosaur creatures. So then the Avengers are fighting the dinosaurs, and eventually kind of like beat them, and they're about to get to like they're about to get over to the flutist when some more like rocks collapse, and the guy like gets away. So then they're like, okay, that was weird. Whatever. Let's figure out what's going on with Professor X. Oh, they also find the rest of the X-Men. So like Thor and T'Challa and Vision find the rest of the X-Men, and then Iron Man like is still nowhere to be seen. But then they come in and they see this guy who's dressed up like Angel, but then he like takes his But he's like, I am not Angel. I am Magneto. I just pretended to be Angel so I could trick Iron Man. And Iron Man's like, no, you tricked me. And then he like throws Iron Man at Steve Rogers and like beats up on these guys pretty hard and collapses more rocks on Thor, T'Challa, and the Vision. Grabs Wanda, Steve, and Tony, and the X-Men, which is Cyclops, Iceman, Jean, Cyclops, Charles Xavier, and Iceman. Yeah. So we're missing Angel and we're missing Beast. We're missing Beast, obviously, because he left a while ago. And then we're missing Angel, which becomes very important later on. So he grabs them all, and he's like, ah, ha, ha, I'm going to take you to my base. And there's nothing you can do about it. Rah, 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 rah. So they fly off, and then Thor, T'Challa, and Vision like break out and like, we have to go save them. So first thing they do is they go, and then there's like a little B plot with like Hawkeye looking for Natasha, which he's just sad because he goes and like fights with Daredevil in his comic between this comic and the next comic. The Avengers is really hard to follow because it's like it's like the Justice League. There's like a lot of shit going on, and the characters like pop in and out into like other comics, and like you gotta like, it's really hard to like fully. Like I remember there's whole series where you're just like following you're like reading issue to issue of like the Avengers, and like it's like you're missing like a lot. Like it'll be like, oh, this story happened in like Black Panther 47 through 45 or 47 through 55, and you're like, the fuck. Like it's just, you'll go from like one issue and then the next issue like it's completely different. Like it does not follow the previous issue because the previous issue continued in like a totally different comic line. Like the Avengers was kind of like a real fuck you comic to collect. Like I promise you, because I tried for a while before I gave up and just did X-Men and Moon Knight. Anyway, so we find out from Magneto bragging to Wanda, actually just to himself, because we start the next issue and Wanda's dancing and he's talking to like the flutist guy who's not really responding to him about how he realized one day that like there's a lot of iron in blood, and iron's like a metal he can control with magnetism, so he can use that to cut off. He can't use it to like mind control people, but he can use it. He's like developed the ability to control like the billions amount of like specks of iron in blood to like have enough control to like puppet people, essentially, not like mind control, but to like cut off enough of their brain, so they're kind of like numb or like out of their minds, but at the same time be able to like control their body movements by like distributing blood to like it's real bizarre. It doesn't make any fucking sense, obviously, and I don't think it like really comes up ever again because this is like a really OP kind of fucking thing that he can do. But here it is. It's canon-ish. So that's how he's controlling these people. The Avengers like show up to this base. They don't show up to this base. What happens is, so Magneto takes his like crew of like hypnotized X-Men and Avengers and attacks this like atomic conference and kidnaps some like atomic scientists. And then as he's trying to like get out of there with his like bounty, the Avengers show up and they fight. And then he like uses like a white gas or black gas. He uses some sort of gas to like smoke them and like get out of there. And at this point, the Avengers have gathered Daredevil and Wanda to like help fill out the team for this mission. But the Avengers are able to like follow them back to Magneto's base of operations somehow. And they, as Magneto's like celebrating his like victory and how he pretty much tells these atomic guys that he's gonna radiate the whole Earth. It's like the Sentinel thing. It's like exactly the same plot as the Sentinel thing from the other Avengers comic, where he's gonna use nuclear power to like irradiate the whole Earth with radiation, which will kill like 92% of the population, and then those that are left will be mutants, and then he'll rule all the mutants with his magnetic powers, and then it'll be done. And then fuck humans, essentially, right? Like it's his whole crazy plan. Around this time, the rest of the Avengers that I just mentioned, like they show up, and then they start fighting the hypnotized like Avengers, and they're getting beat up pretty bad. But one of the things we note is that Vision is not around. Like he's precariously missing. And at some point in this battle, when like things really start going bad and it looks like Magneto's gonna win, the flutist like walks up to Magneto and just like knocks him the fuck out. And we find out that I think it's Thor who's left standing still, is like, whoa! And then Vision pops out and he's like, what up, bitches? I was possessing this guy the whole time. And then they free everyone from like their mesmerism, and then Professor X uses his like telepathic powers to put Magneto to like sleep. Like literally, I think Captain America is just like, oh, good job putting Magneto to sleep with your mind powers. And I was like, I mean, if he could do that all along, like what the fuck are we doing here? Whatever, nothing matters. So they're gonna do whatever they're gonna do with Magneto, and then think that's it. And then they all kind of like they all leave. And then the Black Widow decides she's going to break up with Daredevil and join the Avengers, which isn't super relevant to like the X-Men stuff. But the X-Men, the big thing about the X-Men is that they're like, hey, wait a second, where's Angel in all this? And everyone's like, I don't know. And Tony's like, I didn't see him. I thought that was Angel, but I didn't see anybody else. And they're like, uh-oh, we got to find Angel. And so then that leads to like a lot of the collab stuff that occurs right after the Beast story. But yeah, that's the end of like this first phase of like the X-Men, Uncanny X-Men are done, but they still exist in the Marvel universe, and so they're still being like somewhat utilized in different aspects. But the Uncanny X-Men it's not on hiatus because they just kept reprinting old issues and doing like double spreads or whatever. But this is what they're actually doing during that time frame. And yeah, it was good. It was fun to see all this little interactions. I don't think I read a lot of this stuff before. Some of this I have seen, and some of the one of the stories in the future, like to get you all excited, is a super big Captain America story that the X-Men are involved in, and it's one of like the earliest like crossover events that really exists. And it's not like a big deal crossover event. It all takes place in like the Captain America comic, but the X-Men play like a pretty predominant role in that issue, and it's interesting to see that, because like you'd see people like guest star in other people's issues, obviously with this, but just kind of on and off. But yeah, that's going to be a couple weeks after this one releases. And next we're going to hit up the Beast and see how the Beast becomes the Beast that everyone knows from like the regular human-looking guy. And yeah, cool. Catch you all later.